Hello and welcome to Niaga Spotlight with me, Tamina Kaustri. Niaga Spotlight goes through the week in business headlines and future affairs, market watch, industries, analysis and insights. We've got you covered right here on Niaga Spotlight. Well, this week on Future Affairs, we're looking at combating corruption via strategic approaches. Now, combating corruption is a challenge in any context because corruption has many faces and can occur in different forms across all sectors and institutions of a country. The UN Convention Against Corruption, UNCAC, recognizes this and calls, among others, for effective coordinated anti-corruption policies under Article 5 to address the problem strategically. Now, Article 5 of UNCAC stipulates that all member states, including Malaysia, produce a document that is the main reference for anti-corruption initiatives at the national level. In line with this, Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim launched the National Anti-Corruption Strategy, the NACS 2024 to 2028, earlier this week. Now, NACS, which is the successor of the NACP, focuses on enhancing corruption, prevention and improving governance in public services and GLCs. Zooming in on revelations during the launch, MACC Chief Tan Sri Azambaki noted that Malaysia has lost a staggering at least 277 billion ringgit to corruption over the past 5 years. This amounts to roughly 54.4 billion ringgit per year, or an equivalent of 1 MDB scale losses every single year. So, derived from Malaysia's GDP estimates between 2018 and 2023, this sobering figure of 277 billion ringgit highlights the significant economic and social impacts of graft. All such monies could have also been allocated towards pressing national development priorities, including, for example, poverty eradication. Well, the NACS is one of the Madani government's foremost steps in developing a national corruption suppression strategy. Today, Niaga Spotlight focuses on NACS's strategy components with guest on studio, Reinushini Chandrasegaram, who is Managing Director with RC Compliance Sdn Bhd. Reinu, very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much, Tamina, for having me here on Niaga Spotlight.
Fantastic. So, Reinu, let's get the conversation started by me asking you about the fact that, of course, corruption can be prosecuted after the fact, but here we are today to discuss, first and foremost, looking at prevention. So having had a look at some of the main pointers of the NACS 2024 to 2028, do you find the prevention aspect being adequately addressed, coming from your area of expertise, anti-corruption?
Okay, thank you very much. Good question, Tamina. Now, I'd like to highlight a little bit about the NACS itself. Now, it's got 5 strategic pillars: education, public accountability, public voice, enforcement and incentives. And there are 60 sub-strategies in there. Most of it is geared towards prevention. Now, when we're talking from a business perspective, these preventive strategies are not really addressing the business aspects of public listed companies, small and medium enterprises, other than perhaps touching on public procurement aspects.
Right.
So what I would like to see more with respect to preventive measures are instances of education, not so much touching on the, as stated here, schools,
right,
preschools, higher learning institutions, TVET courses. I would look at anti-corruption training agenda for organizations in the private sector, within the small and medium enterprises, because I think that generation of awareness on exactly what corruption is will ensure that our juggernaut of business is actually geared towards ensuring that they prevent corruption in all aspects.
Well, when you're talking about prevention, but more at a preliminary stages, because you mentioned schools, kindergartens, even TVET centers.
Yeah.
So are we talking about it being a little bit of a lost cause, perhaps, when it comes to those who are already within the workforce and already part of the business components? Because, of course, that is going to continue on for at least another 20 to 30 years. So shifting that mentality is equally important. Let's focus on that, Reinu.
I think that is a very pointed question, and yes, that's true, because the education aspect of the NACS touches on preschools, on education establishments that are individuals who are currently learning. What about their parents? What about their bosses? What about those directors who are currently within organizations and actually taking forward business as it is? It's a generation, isn't it? You take a generation from the preschool, 5 years old, 6 years old, to the age of 30 before you can inculcate ethics, integrity, anti-corruption, good behavior, good conduct. Let me ask this very pertinent question. So you've got a preschooler, you've got an educated, someone in education. Are we abdicating that responsibility to the state? To make sure the state is the one that gives that moral education, gives that anti-corruption education, good behavior, ethical conduct, imbuing that within the young ones, within children. So what happens to them once they come home? They are already with parents. Now, if the parents, and that's you and I, parents are already at that stage, as you've mentioned earlier, we're trying to nurture the young, but the older generation are already stuck there. What happens then? We're taking 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or maybe even 2 steps back.
Yeah, fair enough. So from there, moving into the fact that there are plenty of recent reports, such as the Ideas and CBI one from 2021, where it shows that bribery is actually perceived as a standard operating procedure, an SOP, for up to 71% of Malaysians when they were asked, because they believe that officials are highly corrupt and etc. So the question that we have to ask is, what are some model preventive policies for public or especially private sectors which can help enhance transparency and accountability? Because it's great to have a national strategy, but at the same time it boils down to the individual organizational level. What have you found in your experience via training, etc., has actually worked and within a fixed, specific span of time?
All right. Now, to start with, we have the MACC Corporate Liability Act, this Section 17, capital A. Now, all organizations need to put in place adequate procedures. So the anti-corruption compliance program is a must, regardless of your size. You could be an SME, PLC, GLC, MNC operating in Malaysia.
So anywhere from 20 to thousands of employees, right?
Absolutely right. But I think there's one point we have overlooked. The supply chain of public listed companies, of GLCs, are made up of SMEs, small and medium enterprises. They make up the bulk of businesses in Malaysia, 98%. They contribute 40% of the GDP. They employ 50% of the workforce. If you go down to the layman and you ask him what is corruption, what is bribery, unfortunately, his response may be, and this is the reasonable man on the street, his response may be, give money. But that's not just that.
It's also about an asymmetry of power.
Yes,
let's speak about that.
An asymmetry of power. Now, they'll come back and say, I had to do this, I had to engage in corrupt activities because I was instructed to do so. I'm just looking at the chain of command. Someone told me, big boss, and therefore I do it. Look, I need the license. I need the permit. And therefore, I might have to do this in order to get ahead. However, the NACS is now in place, taking the leaf out of UNCAC to curb this at the public sector level. Private sector, we still have some way to go.
Right. So what do you think makes it, in a sense, perhaps, as you said, some way to go in the private sector? Is it easier or vis-a-vis? Is there any way in which this can be done within, let's say, the next 4 years or so, which is what the NACS is targeting, 2024 to 2028. We're already halfway through 2024, right?
Absolutely. So they've got strategy short-term, medium-term, long-term. So when you're saying 4 years, we're looking almost at the long stretch, because 1 to 2 years would be short.
Yes, medium to long.
Medium to long. What I would think to recommend is there should be fostering that culture of integrity takes a very strong commitment by the private sector. Now, putting in place anti-corruption compliance programs, ABMS, anti-bribery management systems, having due diligences conducted on your supply chain, as well as new hires. Anyone who comes in has to be vetted on their integrity and ethics levels, examinations, ethical dilemmas. Let me share with you.
Sure.
If you were to give these tests on ethical dilemmas to individuals who are going to take up a senior position, what's the passing rate like?
Right. And are there actually any organizations which strictly enforce this at the moment in Malaysia?
Not. For private sector, not really, because it boils down to each company, each organization.
It's still, well, it's not so much voluntary or non-voluntary, it's just that it's left to your own discretion.
Yes, it's a, of course, you need to abide by various regulations like the MACC, adequate procedures, trust principles, which is the T says training and awareness.
Right.
Then you have regulatory, bursars, regulations require that anti-corruption measures are put in place for all listed organizations. There's no running away from that. You have to have anti-corruption policies. You have to have corruption risk assessments. You have to have whistleblowing policies.
Let's stop on the whistleblowing policies and look a little bit deeper into that.
Okay.
Now, within a culture that in general acknowledges, but quite silently so, bribery, can whistleblowing actually be successful, particularly when the fallout from whistleblowing, generally the onus falls again upon the whistleblower in many organizational cases and examples and case studies. So how do we shift that?
I like that you asked that question. Now, the NACS, some of its strategies, let me highlight 2 of its strategies. One of the strategy is to review the Whistleblowing Protection Act, 2010. And another one under incentives is to actually provide incentives to whistleblowers who report misconduct that eventually results in case detection. Now, what the NACS doesn't do is, it doesn't give the mechanism on which this will be implemented. So we don't know. It's left to the Secretariat, which is the MACC, to then go to the various agencies, where we have lead agencies and you have supporting agencies, to then come out with those various procedures. That's on the NACS. Companies, why do we have such a low level of whistleblowing within organizations, as large as they may be? Is it a fear? A fear of reporting. Now, many organizations do not permit anonymous whistleblowing. However, under corporate liability, it is allowed whistleblowing as anonymous. Now, if you are not anonymous, we have found that people are reluctant to say it. Now, and the other thing is that if I say that I'm the whistleblower, I do it very clearly, I'll be targeted. And it's a toxic culture. And instead of going on the issue that's been addressed, it'll go on the whistleblower.
Becomes a little bit of a witch hunt of sorts.
Exactly, a witch hunt. And then who gets roped in? Unfortunately, sometimes it could be compliance department. It could be integrity or HR.
And what about the teams that run the integrity and compliance departments as well? How do they operationalize in a culture whereby it is still largely understood that whistleblowing generally makes you come under the microscope?
That unfortunately is a very difficult avenue for them to navigate, because on the one hand, integrity units, compliance units. You are there to uphold integrity, uphold governance.
Fair enough.
But you have been suddenly told, tell me who the whistleblower is. I want to know what this is. And when you do the investigation, identify this individual, because we have certain disciplinary actions. Now, I'm not saying it's happening to all organizations, but some organizations it does. Now, it puts integrity and compliance in a very difficult position. You have your professional ethics to uphold to. Now, what do? Are you going to say, I'll walk out that door, I'm going to uphold my, the reason for being in this particular organization, in this particular position, or am I going to see, well, I've got bills to pay at the end of the month?
Or what about also flipping the script and seeing ways in which the new NACS actually then empowers individuals who are in such positions, regardless of the organization, because now there's a wider understanding. Look, we've actually itemized the losses just due to graft and corruption. 277 B over 5 years is no small number, right? So do you think there is going to be increased, let's not call it pressure, let's call it motivation instead? And is there going to be increased motivation amongst public and private spheres for business in Malaysia to move forward in a more ethical manner?
Absolutely, I would think so. The NACS as a strategy, a 5-year strategy, it gives that incentive to businesses because it lays down very clearly, public sector, you are not allowed to do this, this and this because there are mechanisms as a check and balance. For example, internal audit within the public sector has been given more teeth. Auditor General reports are being more scrutinized. Now, we've had in the past, Auditor General reports, you've got situations of excessive leakage, but there is no consequence management on that. So what happens?
Yes, consequence management.
Yes.
Let's move into this very interesting arena when it comes to consequence management and also the arena of public opinion. So, for example, there are various more publicized cases such as, for example, the recent Aman Palestine case, whereby there were actually top brass and company director slapped with 126 charges: cheating, criminal breach of trust, money laundering, totaling more than 39 million ringgit of the company's funds. This was just back in February 2024.
Absolutely.
So these are just some of the more high-profile cases. But I think the public understands and also has a certain amount of outrage that comes with such misappropriation. So how do we shift it into consequences to the level whereby individuals and bad faith actors are actually discouraged from committing corruption or graft in the first place?
You'd be surprised to note.
Sure.
Every organization which is incorporated as an under the small and medium enterprise, they are governed by the SSM, by the Companies Act 2016. In the Companies Act, there are various sections that govern fiduciary duties, and you can be charged for not upholding your fiduciary duty as a director. And your principal are all those shareholders. You are a fiduciary holding on to that sums of money. Now, of course, there is an outrage because your duty to act in good faith, you've breached that. Duty of conflict of interest, duty of loyalty, duty to act in the best interest of the organization. So the principal, which are all the various shareholders, even minority shareholders, definitely have outrage. Now, what more if it is an NGO that handles public funds, funds that have been put forward by the public out of a moral compunction. And this moral compunction, this trust that they've placed has been blatantly, just thrown out the window because certain individuals, due to their greed, unfortunately, have decided that I'm going to enrich myself. Using the AMLA is excellent because AMLA allows that asset recovery. We shall disenfranchise anyone who's gotten ill-gotten gains. At least in some measure, you give the public that level of trust within our enforcement, within the law. So yes, that's what I would say with respect to.
So with respect to that, now moving into another area whereby public perception also really matters, let's talk about open tenders, but particularly from a public policy perspective, Reinu, and examining some of the catalysts for driving more transparency, especially for vast-scale infrastructure projects, which of course, just in any other middle-income developing nation like Malaysia's, are a huge priority.
Okay. Now, according to the NACS, for any organization that wants to get involved in public procurement, there's going to be enacted a Public Procurement Act. Now, it was in the making since 2018.
That's right.
It's very, very important that this year at least it gets put into place. Now, you have to understand, the NACP was... part of it was during the period of pandemic. So there was that 2 years that it wasn't really
oversight was not
the oversight
ideal.
wasn't there. So this year we're looking at public procurement as an act. Open tender is definitely something that we encourage with respect to private organizations that want to tender for big mega projects. Now let me share with you, right? For any in the strategy here, public accountability, if organizations want to bid for public procurement contracts exceeding 10 billion, they require anti-bribery ABMS certification.
And what does that actually mean in practice?
In practice, it shows that you have got policies, procedures, steps, manuals, training to inculcate the fact that anti-bribery and anti-corruption is not acceptable within the organization. Now, open tender has also got a possibility of it being badly abused by organizations. They could form a cartel. Very recently, we had project tender cartel by the JKR.
That's right, direct appointment via cronies, etc., family members, or those who become family members.
Those who become family members. And in the tender cartel case, you have insiders who tell the outsiders what the project bid level is, when to put in their submission, which department, what is the highest quotation, what should you do to actually win the case. And the people who bid for it are using companies that are fake.
And on the other hand as well, from the procurement side of angle, basically we also do not have the criteria being properly spelled out for what the expectations and parameters are for large-scale tender projects, as well as the reasons for the selection of company XYZ for whichever project.
Precisely, and that we take it one step further. You said open tender, I take it open contracting.
Right.
Open contracting, whereby there is that transparency at the bidding stage, planning stage. Who won the bid? Why? What was the reason? At the contract award stage, as it progresses, project management stage. So that then information is then made available to businesses that want it. And this brings us to the Public Information Act, which is something that I hope will be implemented in the NACS.
What do you see as being a direct outcome and a positive result if it is implemented?
Having access to information promotes transparency and accountability. You can't hide, because once the procurement is done digitally, it is online, and then again, let me put a caveat that the software that you use has to be unhackable.
Fair enough,
right?
Especially considering data protection issues that we have.
Data protection issues. But going back to the fact that this information is then available, civil society, all individuals who have an interest can just go to whichever website, whichever ministry, to check on the tender, what is the status, and not just looking at the e-procurement on the Ministry of Finance website. You say, okay, it's been the tender has been won by so-and-so company and this is the value.
Exactly. And from there, moving on from open tenders and even open contracts, let's go into the fact that explicit anti-corruption policies and strategies, Reinu, they're not necessarily the most suitable and certainly not the only way whereby it's recommended, especially by UNCAC, to address corruption. So what are your thoughts on this, using more of a soft power approach? And how successful that has been, perhaps even in regional or international models that may be comparative or exemplary for Malaysia to learn from?
Okay. When we try to take a soft approach on anti-corruption, we can't burden business with over-regulation.
That's
We
fair.
need to simplify it and also make it transparent in a sense that we know exactly what we're paying for. Cut out the middleman. Let businesses deal directly with various organizations in order to obtain whatever permits, licenses, certifications that they require from those particular public, like for example, Bomba, for example, licenses to open a manufacturing site, land office, for example, no runners. Now that would be a first step, I would think. If we can cut that out, I think that would be amazing. Consider this. Imagine if, and this is just hypothetical,
Fair enough.
with some truth in it, if a public organization, a public body that gives out the licenses, you have to use such and such a runner who will then deal with us in order to get your license.
Right.
And the runner comes back to you and says, we charge 80,000 in order to do this. Where is the business going to go, especially if it's a small and medium enterprise, for example? So these are the sort of things that I think we need to cut it down. Now, best practices that I like the fact that you stated on best practices, accountability. We must have an open door policy within the organization, direct access to our board of directors, direct access to the authorities that are decision makers within the organization, so that you can actually say what the problems are. For a listed company,
Right.
recently we've got listed organizations who have many subsidiaries. The subsidiaries are not actually regulated by Bursa Malaysia, they're regulated by SSM. But the listed organization...
Externally up to a certain extent.
Yeah, up to a certain extent. But the listed organization is regulated by Bursa. So what about the various subsidiaries which have their own managing directors? So that chain of command, that decision making, then doesn't fall to the listed organization.
Right.
And yet, the listed organization gets
Is
penalized.
culpable.
Is culpable as well as the Sdn Bhd.
Exactly. So in conclusion, Reinu, let's wrap it up with a quick thought about, so what is the path forward? As it's quite clear that we need to pursue anti-corruption with targets in mind, and it's more important for them to be achievable, if modest, rather than, extremely broad-based but unfeasible. A quick comment on that.
A quick comment on that. Anti-corruption, ethical behavior begins with us. We, the natural person, and not the legal person, which is the organization,
Right.
are the standard bearers, the torch holders of ethics and integrity. Our children are going to school, learning about morals. Who teaches us about it? They will come back and learn to be, or whatever misconduct behavior, just from us. And whatever that's been taught to them has gone.
That's right. Thank you very much for the
Thank
conversation, Reinu. And I think we have really managed to zoom in on what is to be done when it comes to the NACS. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So this has been Niaga Spotlight with me, Tamina Kaustri. We'll see you next Friday with more business analysis and insights. Here's to a productive week ahead. So we're just in the background and the credits are rolling.